This is Battleground PA, a PennLive podcast discussing the issues that matter to Pennsylvanians and documenting the events in the Keystone State and beyond that could shape how you vote in the 2024 elections.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Joyce Davis. I'm PennLive's Outreach and Opinion Editor. And yes, this is Battleground PA. Today, I have two experts who I'm delighted to welcome because they're going to talk about something that we have not paid as much attention to, I think, as we should, and that is international affairs and the 2024 elections. Listen, I'm maybe delighted to say or not delighted to say that I do think for the first time Americans are thinking about the world when they go to the polls, right? Frequently we're saying it's only local issues, but no, now I think we're seeing there's problems in the Middle East. We're seeing there's problems in Ukraine, and many of us are worried about Vladimir Putin. I just want to tell you that we have people here who are absolutely qualified and experts to kind of talk about these issues. We have Michael Froman, who is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. I don't know if most of our readers, our viewers understand that, but that is the preeminent international kind of affairs thinking group in our nation. And I am just so honored to have Michael Froman here with us. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me.
Very good. And we also have with us Shannon O'Neill, who is an expert, it seems, in trade, global trade and supply chain issues. And she can also talk about Mexico and Latin America, big issues in our nation in this election. So welcome, Shannon.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Okay, so as I told them earlier, it is going to be their show. I have to just preface it by saying I just returned, as many of our readers know, from Prague for Forum 2000. This is a wonderful international affairs conference that was started by Václav Havel, the late Václav Havel, who was the president of Czechoslovakia at one point and now and the Czech Republic. But basically what I was overwhelmed with was how many people talked about Pennsylvania in Prague, that they are looking at our elections. I mean, these were all democracy advocates and people who are really into, the world events. But they kept at, what is Pennsylvania going to do? How is Pennsylvania, who's going to win? So I told them, my goodness, I didn't know we were the center of the universe, but we are. So with that, let me turn it over to the two of you. Michael, you're here really at the invitation or in collaboration with Franklin and Marshall. So tell us about that and what you plan to talk about. I believe it's tonight that you plan to have your forum.
Well, that's right. Thanks, Joyce, for having us. And you've really underscored it in your introductory comments because the whole world is watching the U.S. election. And of course, within the U.S. election, they're watching the battleground states. And within that, they're looking at Pennsylvania. So the council, with the support of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, has been putting on a series of programs called Election 2024, where we track the positions of the candidates going into the election on a whole range of foreign policy, national security, international economic policy issues. And then we've been traveling around the country into 4 battleground states in particular. We started in Arizona, then went to Georgia. We were in Michigan yesterday, and today we're in Pennsylvania. And we'll have a forum at Franklin and Marshall College with students, members of the community, faculty, to lay out in a nonpartisan way the positions of the issues that are at stake in this election, what the trade-offs might be in relation to the different positions of the candidates, so that ideally the audience and those who are listening in from afar can go to the polls even better educated to think about how foreign policy affects them, how it affects their community, what's at stake in this election, and where do they feel comfortable supporting.
Very good. Well, Shannon, I let me bring you in here too, because you're part of this entourage that's coming here to help explain international events. And clearly you have the hot button issues there with Latin America. So tell us a little bit about what you plan to talk about.
So we'll talk about lots of issues, but two of them that are important are trade. And, many of the partners around the world, but particularly Mexico is the biggest partner today, a trading partner with the United States. So that will be a big part about what we talk about and how that matters for US consumers, but how that matters for US industries, because so many of US industries actually export to Mexico, export to Canada, our other neighbor, and survive. Those are the clients, right? International clients that come next door. So that's one issue I'll talk about. And then I'll also talk about migration. That's also an issue that's on the table all over the nation, but particularly here in Pennsylvania as well. And how we think about our immigration system. We've had lots of things put on the table. We had a big bill that was put in front of the Senate back in February that would have strengthened law enforcement, but also added some more visas, legal visas for people to come into the United States, and talk a bit about what immigration might look like to the United States, particularly when we get into next year with a new president.
Good. I'm going to ask you guys to also just lay out for me, for each one of you, what you consider to be the top, let's say, 3 foreign policy issues that we Pennsylvania voters should be thinking about. But I'll have to tell you that as far as I'm seeing, when I get all these op-eds, and I do get a lot of them in letters to the editor, this immigration thing, this venom that we're seeing in other parts of the world is just not here, at least not in what I'm getting. And one of our reporters, Evie DeJesus, just did a series of stories looking at the benefits that migrant workers are bringing to our farms. And so anyway, you tell me what you think we need to know are the top issues when we're thinking about going to the polls, the top foreign issues. Michael, why don't you start for us?
Wow, there's such a long list, but I'll try and keep it to just a couple. Look, I think, as you said in your introduction, Joyce, elections in the US, presidential elections, don't usually turn on foreign policy issues. And this one won't either. The domestic issues are certainly more significant and higher on people's priority list. But they're probably going to play a bigger role in this election than they ever have before, because there's a fundamental choice between the two candidates when it comes to the role of the US in the world. And I think that, to me, is one of the big issues. How much US involvement, engagement, leadership should there be in the world? On what issues? How do we think about the resources to back that up, whether it's for Ukraine or the Middle East, or to deter Chinese military aggression in the Indo-Pacific? These are all fundamental questions where the candidates have a difference of view, and we'll be debating these issues going into the election. So I think U.S. leadership, the role of the U.S. in the world, is the number one issue. And then I think beneath that, you can look at a number of issues. You can look at a couple of regional issues like Ukraine, the Middle East, et cetera, and other regions as well, Latin America, Africa. There's a big war going on right now in Sudan with a lot of displaced people. It doesn't get much attention in our media, but it is a tragic situation. And what role should we be playing there? You can focus on China as a major issue. And then I think an issue that I've spent a lot of time on, and I think has been key in Pennsylvania as well, is the issue of international economics, trade. How do developments abroad affect our economy here at home? How does it affect jobs, wages, the ability to produce things here and export them to other countries, and the competition that comes from foreign companies as well? And how do we wrestle with those difficult issues as we look ahead?
Absolutely. And Shannon, this economic issue ties into, I'm sure, what you're going to talk about. But, the tariffs are something that has people really confused, right? Yeah, we say that China will pay for everything, but I guess the concerns that we have is, are consumers really going to pay for things when you're talking about tariffs? And will we have less access to goods? And anyway, talk about what your issues are. But those are the questions that I'm getting when I get my letters to the editor,
Excellent. Well, the security issues are also, obviously up front and center, but Mike's covered those. So I'll turn to a couple others, and I'll build a bit on the economic issues. And, I think there's a real conversation going on right now in the United States about how the United States should relate to other countries in the global economy and how they affect us. Where do we win and where do we lose? How do we create jobs? Is it by putting up tariffs and protecting sort of the local economy, or is it embracing the global economy and trying to sell to the 8 billion consumers that don't happen to live in the United States? And I think there's really kind of a tug of war here in how we think about how we bring prosperity to the United States. And so to get on your tariff question, that is sort of a view of the world, an assumption that If we put up tariffs, then everything will be made here, and maybe an idea or an assumption that it'll be made for the same price here as it is in other places. And, I don't think we have any evidence that that is true. It just may not be made at all, or US consumers may not have it, or it may just cost a lot more money. And we're going to have to make more, trade-offs in what we can buy if we're going to, be able to buy a new car, if we're going to be able to buy a new house, or just buy basic, goods that we go to Walmart or go to your local store. So I think that's another issue. I mean, the other thing I think Americans are struggling with, and this gets to the immigration issue, in some ways that's a very domestic issue. How do we want to think about people from other lands living in our country? How many do we want here? What kinds of people do we want here? And how might we absorb them into our economy? But it's also a global issue because those people are coming from other countries, and there's big changes happening all over the world, whether it's because of wars, people coming from Ukraine or Afghanistan or places like that, whether it's because of other kinds of, economic challenges, disruptions in other countries where people having to flee their countries, whether it's because of shifts in climate and natural disasters where people can no longer live where they once lived. And so we have over 100 million people in the world who have been displaced from their home, 20 million of them here in the Western Hemisphere, and they're moving around. And so the question is both, how do we want to think about migrants? We are a country built on migrants originally, but what are we going to be in the years to come? And then also, how do we think about those people that are moving around the world because they've been forced to leave their homes, and where they should go, and how the United States could play a role or should play a role in aiding them?
And is this really a global issue? Should even the United States have more help from other countries? I mean, do they all really have, even if they come across the southern border, do they all have to stay here? Could they be dispersed and in some sort of cooperative agreement? Is there any talk about that with any of the candidates?
There's some talk. I would say the Biden administration and the Harris campaign has talked a bit about, especially in the Western Hemisphere, a regional agreement. And I would say of the 20 million people that have been moving around the hemisphere here, 80% of them are not coming to the United States. They're going to other countries, and they're in other countries. So there is already kind of a sharing agreement within. But it is a question. I mean, we're also seeing that globally. If you look at European elections, they're struggling with migration as well. Who do you let in, and how do you let them in, and how do you integrate them into your society? So it is something many places around the world, including ourselves and including Pennsylvania, are thinking about.
Well, Michael, I have to tell you that when I was in Prague, and the president of Prague, of the Czech Republic was there, and we had the former president of Taiwan who was there. I mean, we had a lot of movers and shakers around the globe, and one of the issues came up with how dependable is the U.S. as an ally. And NATO. Are we going to really stay in NATO? Are we going to strong arm our allies? What should Americans know about that issue, about our dependability as an ally?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to recognize just how valuable our alliances are to the United States. We compare ourselves to China as an example. China may have a large navy. They may be investing a lot in their military, including their nuclear capacity. These are things we need to focus on and worry about and respond to. But what China doesn't have, that the U.S. has, is this network of alliances. And that gives us great capability to project power around the world, to create peace and prosperity around the world. And we have decades of history to look at it. So whether it's NATO or AUKUS with the Australia, UK, and the United States, or other alliances in the Indo-Pacific, we have this network that is really very important to our own security and to the security of the world. Now, for years, we've been urging the Europeans, in particular, to pay a larger portion of the cost of NATO. They're getting every country to pay 2% of their GDP into defense. It used to be very few countries in NATO did. Now, I think 23 of the 35 countries in NATO have achieved that goal, and they are certainly, and some have gone way beyond that goal, given Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Countries like Poland and the Baltics and elsewhere are spending substantially more than 2% on national defense. So that there's still work to be done in that regard, but having those allies who are willing to invest in collective defense and being able to rely on them is very important to our security. And conversely, they rely on us. And so whether it's with regard to Eastern Europe or elsewhere around the world in the Indo-Pacific, credibility is a really important asset, and it's hard to create and it's very easy to lose. And so it's really important that administration after administration, Republican and Democratic, have over the years really invested in the credibility of our alliances. And that's going to be important going forward. And during the first Trump administration, there was obviously some question about that. I think former President Trump questioned some of the dynamics around NATO, urged the European countries to spend more on NATO. But ultimately, I think it's important that the U.S. stand behind these alliances and that we do so in a way that's credible, because that's the best way to deter our adversaries and competitors from taking action against our interests.
Right, and I think there is legitimate concern about what happens if Putin is not checked in Ukraine. And I'll tell you, we had a visit actually from the foreign minister of Lithuania here, who came and really wanted to speak to our voters to help us to understand why we should be supporting Ukraine. But I'm just wondering, with everything that all the on the Republican side, the rhetoric seems to be not as strong and not as supportive of Ukraine as perhaps on the Democratic side. I mean, is that fair to say, without being partisan, that there's a difference there in the level of support? But is there the same level of concern about what could happen if Putin simply invades other parts of Europe?
So first, I'd say when you look at the polls, the vast majority of the American public thinks it's important to support Ukraine. And when Congress ultimately voted on the package of support for Ukraine, it had overwhelming bipartisan support. I think 80% of the Congress voted for it. Now, it took, there was a 5-month delay in voting for it because there were problems in the House of Representatives within the Republican caucus in terms of getting that to the floor for a vote. But once it got there, there was broad bipartisan support. And I think we're all hopeful that that support continues to exist going forward. There are these dynamics that you pointed out, Joyce, and I say there's really two flavors of isolationism that one hears right now on the Republican side of the debate. One is that we should just be doing less abroad. We should be focusing more domestically, focusing our resources more domestically, whether it's on hurricane relief or domestic investments or all the needs that we have here at home. And we shouldn't be involved in particularly wars that seem difficult to envisage how they're going to end, forever wars. The other version of it is a little bit more refined, and it's an argument that we should leave Ukraine to the Europeans to sort out. It's in Europe. The Europeans have military capabilities. They're part of NATO. Let them take the lead. We should be focusing on what the greatest threat is to U.S. interests globally, these folks would argue, which is China. So we should be focusing on the Indo-Pacific, where we don't have as many allies in the region that have strong military capabilities like we do in Europe, and we should leave Ukraine to the Europeans. I think ultimately, while it's very important for the Europeans to play a big role, and they are playing a bigger role. In fact, they are putting more resources into Ukraine than the U.S. is. Without U.S. engagement, without U.S. leadership, it's very questionable whether Europe would be able to step up and do it. They're doing it in the context of an alliance that the U.S. leads. And without that kind of leadership, if the U.S. were to pull back, it could well be that the Europeans would not be able to fill in behind us. And that would, to your point, Joyce, leave Putin in the position of being able to achieve his goals with regard to Ukraine, maybe with regard to other neighboring countries, and even more worrisome, even beyond Putin, even beyond Russia, sending a signal to other countries around the world that if they want to engage in wars with their neighbors, use military force to change borders against the very first principle of the post-World War II system, they can. And that, to me, is a slippery slope, a Pandora's box that is very much against U.S. interests.
Well, this isolationism trend clearly has economic implications, Shannon. So I want to get your comments on this, because we all know it's pocketbook issues. They're number one, right? But international impacts the pocketbook, how much we're spending for things. So talk a little bit about this isolationist trend and how it might impact global trade and pocketbook issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've already seen in the last number of years, as we put tariffs up on China and other places, starting the Trump administration, but continued under the Biden administration, we've already seen cost to consumers. Prices have risen for everyday goods. in many ways. And we've seen, cost to businesses that import particular, import components that then go into things that they sell to Americans or that they sell abroad. So there already has been a cost, but because those tariffs have been pretty centered on China and centered on particular industries, we haven't seen it be economy-wide. When you start talking about tariffs broadly across the global economy, that would have bigger effects. It'd have bigger effects on prices. Prices would increase, and there's some studies out there that say, if you really saw broad-based tariffs under the next administration, it could increase by $2,500 per household in the United States, a significant amount of money. But it also, and I think this is often the forgotten part there, is that it also affects the way U.S. business works, because a lot of times you buy parts, you make parts here, but you buy some parts from other places. And if the prices of that part goes up, then the price of your overall, thing that you're making goes up. So, you're making a car and you're trying to sell it for $35,000 and you're assembling it here, but some of the parts come from other countries. And if you pay tariffs on that, that $35,000 car becomes a $45,000 car. And then, as a family, you think, maybe I'll just keep the car I have for another 6 months because I don't really have $45,000. I'll wait a little bit. And then that goes through the whole economy. That means not so many cars are sold on dealerships. That means there aren't so many dealerships. That means the commerce around the dealerships, people aren't stopping for lunch at Chipotle. All of this comes out in kind of the retail side and slows down the overall economy. The other thing that we haven't really talked about with tariffs is we might put tariffs on, but guess what? Other countries might put them on us too. And so that makes the kinds of things we do, the competitiveness of US exports, even less competitive. And other places that export things will fill in, whether that's Europe or China or Latin America or Southeast Asia or lots of other places that want to be able to sell their goods abroad. So there's a lot of effects here that it's hard to know what they will be, but undoubtedly, if we do see a real increase in protectionism, they're going to be high. They're going to be high for, the day-to-day prices here in the United States, in states like Pennsylvania and all others. And they're going to make it much tougher for US companies that want to reach consumers all over the world to be able to sell at affordable prices.
Got it. Well, you've pretty made a case for why not we shouldn't relationism. So that's great. But let me just throw another question. We have a limited amount of time here, but one of the concerns that we have is we wait until there's a crisis before we help Americans understand things. Those of us who really care about international affairs, we're all guilty of not enough to break this down for America. I just want to talk to this great Council on Foreign Relations about, do you have any strategies going forward that you don't have to rush around and play catch up, right? when there's an election, but that there's a steady stream of information going to our American voters. Michael, you want to tackle that? You're the president, so you should tackle that one.
No, I'd be happy to, and thank you for that question, because it really goes to the purpose of the council. We are a think tank, a publisher, an educational institution, and a national membership organization. And we focus on all those different areas. And so, part of our focus is on developing policy proposals and analysis for people in government and international organizations, Congress, to help them do their jobs. But a lot of our focus is reaching out around the rest of the country. Today, I went to visit a high school here in Pennsylvania, where they're using our CFR education material, our curriculum support material, to talk about. And today's topic was AI regulation. Should there be international regulation of AI? And it was a terrific discussion among juniors and seniors in high school about it, really engaged. And we do that all over the country. We have networks of religious leaders and local journalists and local state officials who we pull together and help provide them material on foreign policy. So as they're talking to their constituents and their stakeholders, that they can be better informed about these issues. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't both mention Foreign Affairs, which is our leading magazine, the leading magazine in the field, I can say immodestly, and is a great publication that has some of the most important articles from a wide range of perspectives. We're nonpartisan, and so we make a real effort to ensure that we're publishing people with a wide range of perspectives. And CFR.org, which provides a lot of material at different levels of detail on what's going on in the world, analysis and context for that, and our podcasts and our short form videos on YouTube and our social media. I encourage your listeners to look for all of that, because it helps people understand not just the facts of what's going on, but what's the context, the history, the analysis that goes around it about what the implications are. And that makes for a more informed citizenry, not just every 4 years when it's time to vote for president, but all throughout the year and every year.
Well, it looks like you guys are doing your part to have the information there. We just have to make sure that our citizens are taking advantage of it. So, and part of that falls on us as a newspaper to also make sure that those issues are in our publications as well and online. So I'm making a point, actually, at least once a month to have some international affairs commentary in our opinion section. So I'm going to, we're almost at the end, but I'm going to leave it to you guys. If there's something that we've missed that you think our readers, our viewers and listeners and voters want to know, what is that message? Shannon, why don't you go first, and we'll let Michael close us out.
I mean, I think what I would say here, and I grew up in the Midwest, so I understand, the focus on local communities and the like, but that what happens internationally around the world matters for everything that you do day to day. It matters for what shows up on your dining room table and the prices of those things. It matters in the safety and security of your families because of military links and the like. It matters in the environment that's around you and sort of the cleanliness and the health of the people around you. It matters in your community because there are many people from all over the world who are part of your community or communities near you. So while we often take elections and it's a moment where we look internally and we look at local issues, and that's really important, pocketbook issues and other issues, those issues, the reverberations of international affairs and international effects on those local issues are real and important, and we should all be thinking about it.
Well said, Shannon. Michael, you want to close us out with what
I agree with everything Shannon said. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here in Pennsylvania, but your vote matters. And the whole world is watching. And I think it's important, whoever you're going to vote for, to be thinking about what the trade-offs are in the policies that they propose. And do they reflect what you think U.S. interests and U.S. values are? And then to make sure that that you are exercising your right to vote, so that we can have a clear election that with a clear result that people around the country will accept and the people around the world will accept.
Absolutely. And of course, we are all hoping and encouraging peaceful elections without any thought of intimidating or trying to hurt anyone this November 5th. Please, guys, that's a message that we keep repeating. We all are Americans, and we all want to join hands to elect good representatives for our country. And again, even PennLive, it says, we're not going to tell you who to vote for, but we're going to bring you enough information that we're confident you will make the right choices. So with that, I do want to thank Michael Froman and Shannon O'Neill from the Council on Foreign Relations, and wish you all the best in your forum tonight at Franklin and Marshall.
Thanks very much for having us.
All right. Goodbye now. Goodbye, readers, viewers, and listeners. We'll see you again next week on Battleground PA.